The information provided on Terminal Addiction Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified provider with any questions you might have regarding medical or mental health condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast. The views and opinions expressed by the guests, the hosts, are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization or institutions. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we make no guarantee regarding the completeness, reliability, or applicability of the content discussed. Listening to this podcast does not establish provider-patient relationship. If you're experiencing a medical emergency or mental health crisis, please contact emergency services or crisis line immediately.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Terminal Addiction. I'm Doug Ake.
And I'm Old Dog.
That's Paul B over there. I don't know where Old Dog came from, but we'll take what we get.
I needed a new moniker.
I'll take it. I like it. So we are back. We appreciate everybody who's been tuning in and listening. We've gotten some good response, some good feedback, and we just appreciate everybody, checking us out and giving us your support, and hopefully we're able to help some people out there. We wanted to do something a little different today, so we're gonna bounce around a couple of different topics. So please try to be patient with us. Please try to stay with us. We're gonna try to go. So I think Paul's got something on his mind he wants to bring up first.
Yeah, I want to start off talking about Gila Monster spit.
You're gonna have to fill me in on the Gila Monster spit, Paul. I'm not too familiar.
So no, what I want to talk about is medications that we use for addiction. I'm going to take it from historical standpoint. Gila Monster spit is actually where our drugs like Ozempic and Trulicity and Mounjaro come from. They were looking at the spit of the Gila Monster, and they realized, first of all, that, hey, it lowers down blood sugars because it makes the body thinking it's producing more of this chemical called glucagon, and the body's responses produces more insulin. And they also realized that it slows the movement of food down through the stomach. So they started, selling it to people with type 2 diabetes. And before long, people realized, hey, you know what? This will work really well for people with weight problems. And over time, they realized that it does one more thing, and it affects a chemical in our brain called dopamine. And so it reduces some of the cravings, but it's not the first drug that we have that has done that. Back when I started back in the 1990s, we used to give this medication for overdoses called Narcan. And Narcan, they found that in low doses, does the same thing. It reduces cravings. It blocks certain receptors in the brain. And so now today, we have Narcan not just as an IV drug, but later on as a nasal spray, and we give it in low doses to help with cravings as well. In early days, we used to give other drugs like Suboxone. We used to give other drugs like methadone, and we found that over time that some of these drugs, they do have side effects. But we're finding that some of the brain chemicals do affect the way that we treat people. So along with other therapies like group therapy and 12-step programs, we find that sometimes with some people, using medication to treat some of these addictions works well.
Yeah, and I always find it interesting, and I was this way when I first came around and was getting clean and sober, that the reluctancy for addicts and alcoholics to take a medication that might actually help them. We'll take anything that a drug dealer gives us. We'll let anybody make our drinks for us. We'll go to the worst parts of town and buy stuff from a guy named Three Fingered Joe that we can't identify, but we don't want to take anything that a certified pharmacist or addictionologist or a doctor who's trying to help us get clean and sober. We don't want to take any of that crap because we want to be all natural. We want to do this on our own. We want to prove that we've got the willpower to do it, and we don't want that. We don't want to be dependent on something else. And So I see a lot of people, and I was this way early on, reluctant to take medications, but I really do see it help a lot of people. We use, a pretty consistent, grouping of medications. We use things like a gabapentin or an oral naltrexone or the Vivitrol injection to help with some things. We also use things like Suboxone, Subutex, Subzolve, which all sort of fall into the same category to help people with opiate addictions curb some of those cravings. Because if somebody can't sit still long enough to hear the message that's being given to them, it's going to be real hard for them to learn something new and try this sober way of life. So a lot of times those medications are not there to be an end all, fix all, cure all. They're there just to take the sharp part of the edge off so that somebody can sit in treatment or sit in a meeting or open up and share some of these things and not just be crawling out of their skin. So the medications, I've really come around on a lot of those things. And I encourage people to talk to their doctors and obviously make those decisions with some knowledge and some education behind them. But I see all sorts of different avenues. And the medication, like Paul was talking about, coupled with therapy or counseling or a 12-step program, or maybe like going to church and trying to rebuild that spirituality, that medication really can help people sit still long enough to hear the message that's being given to them.
And let's face it, if there was a magic pill that would cure addiction, we'd take a handful of them just to see how it worked.
Absolutely. Probably cut them up, snort them. So, the medication is always kind of a hot button issue, especially around different fellowships. From where I sit, if it's something that's being prescribed and somebody's taking it, as prescribed and it's helping them, I really don't see any problem with that. Now there's other alternative, options out there that are maybe even a little bit more hot button. A lot of people go with like the marijuana maintenance program. And that's kind of a hot button issue these days is California sober. I've also heard of a lot of people using psychedelics, mushrooms, LSD, ketamine to go and explore some of these dark places that it's hard to go when you're not under the influence of something. And if somebody's going to a licensed professional and is able to engage in some of those other activities, and you're not just doing it with a bunch of wooks in a parking lot, there's something to be said for that too. There's also a substance that I think is starting to get some attention called ibogaine, and ibogaine is derived from a couple of different plants. You can go to some South American countries and try this, but it essentially takes people into a very long 12, 36 hour, trip. But what it does is I've heard from people, it re-scrubs your opiate receptors. So people who are long time, addicts and opiate users come out of it and they just have no cravings anymore. They don't have that mental obsession. A lot of those psychedelic therapies, also allow people to go in and address maybe some untreated or undiagnosed trauma or abuse or grief or loss or abandonment that there's a mental block on. So there's something to be said for all different ways for people to get sober. Again, the facility I work at, we don't engage in any of that, and I understand. But I think there is definitely the room for conversation for some people to have for alternative means to explore getting clean and sober.
Yeah, and it's not a new idea. The idea of using psychedelics to treat addiction has gone back decades. Matter of fact, some of the founding members of AA tried psychedelics going way back. So it's not a new idea. We're not advocating nor condemning it. It's just another idea out there.
Yeah, we just like to talk about some things here on this podcast and just bounce some ideas and hear from you guys, see what you guys think. But yeah, Paul's absolutely right. There was one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, Bill Wilson, even in the AA Big Book, writes about the belladonna treatment. And that belladonna treatment, if you want to go Google that, comprised a couple of different psychedelics. And as Bill Wilson was getting clean and sober, getting connected with some of those guys in the 50s and 60s that were exploring some of those psychedelic options, I think he was trying to conjure up a spiritual experience in some people. So, there is a history of it. Not a lot of people in the 12-step fellowship programs really like to talk about this stuff, but it is there. And actually there is a fellowship that I have found It's usually, I think it's mostly online meetings. I think there are some in-person meetings out towards the West Coast called Psychedelics in Recovery. And they base their program, from what I understand, around the 12 steps of AA or NA. But they do leave room for some psychedelic involvement as well. So again, we don't want to be here to tell people what they can or cannot do, or to, like Paul said, condemn anybody or encourage people to try things that are unsafe or dangerous. We just like to be able to have these conversations here. And I've talked to people who have gotten sober, so many different ways, who have found their way into recovery so many different ways. And so I'm here to tell you what's worked for me. Paul's here to tell you what's worked for him, but we also want to hear from you guys and, talk about things that we've heard work for other people as well. One of the other things that we've been talking about here is what the difference is between normal drinking, normal drug use, and alcoholic or addict drinking or drug use. And I think that's a real good question. One of my buddies reached out to me and kind of suggested that as a topic. And so I want to bounce back and forth between Paul and I. But I remember at one point, I drank without consequence. I drank and it was fun. I used and I had a good time. I remember pretty specifically the last time I partied. It was a Halloween, maybe 2008 or 9, maybe 10. And there was something that just tripped over that night, and I continued drinking and using for years and after that. But yeah, there's this difference between alcoholics and non-alcoholics, and non-alcoholics and addicts don't really understand why we do the things we do. They don't understand why we just can't stop, because I hear people talk about cravings, and non-alcoholics and non-addicts really don't understand what a drug or an alcohol craving can be. They say that they're craving a piece of cheesecake, or they're craving some chocolate, and that's just not the case for addicts and alcoholics. Craving for an alcoholic or an addict can feel like somebody put a plastic bag over your head and then you're trying to get your next breath. So I think that there's just a difference in the way that we're hardwired. Addicts and alcoholics just don't seem to have an off switch after a point. I know for me, like I said, I drank heavy early on in my life. I started coming to AA meetings when I was like 16. So I probably already qualified as a problem drinker by the time I was in my, late teens, early 20s. But I think there's a distinction that needs to be made, because some people can go out there and drink and party and have fun and maybe even overdo it a time or two, but they don't have the same consequences that alcoholics and addicts have. So Paul and I are going to talk about a few things that maybe helped us distinguish the difference for us.
Sure. Early on, as a teenager, I was a heavy drinker, and as a senior in high school, my wife and I had been dating for a couple of years, and we decided we were going to take a couple of years break from alcohol. And from the time I was 18 till I was 22, I didn't drink a drop. And then right before I got married, started drinking again, and it was still social drinking. It wasn't until later on I had some trauma in my life that it became a problem. I had a family history of alcoholism. Some of it I didn't know. My family are immigrants, but later on, as I was trying to medicate myself, that's when it really got out of control. And so, through my 20s, 30s, 40s, and I was actually in my mid 50s before I got sober. It just became heavier and heavier. It was again just medication to fix what was broken inside.
Yeah, I think for me there were plenty of opportunities for me to get off this merry-go-round, and for whatever reason at the time, I either didn't think I needed to, or didn't want to, or thought I could stop. Later on when I had the desire to, but I just remember early on, being told from a buddy of mine's dad that I drink different than the rest of the kids, and that was at 15, 16 years old, and I continued to go on and drink and use different than the rest of the people. I remember being in college. Sorry, Mom, for some of these stories, but we're being honest on this show. I remember being in college, and everybody's drinking and partying and using and experimenting, and I was just going overboard. And I remember a number of people that were concerned for me. They either knew what it was or they knew where it was going. and I just couldn't stop. I remember getting in trouble with school and with the law, and just damaging relationships, and so a lot of that unmanageability was starting to creep around and poke its head pretty early on. I lost a lot of pretty good relationships because of it. Dropped out / got kicked out of school once or twice. Ended up with a handful of DUIs by the time I was 21. But I couldn't see it, and I think that's the difference. I remember talking to a guy, and he said, talking about another guy in AA, he said, yeah, all the fun's run out of his drink and he just doesn't know it yet. And I think that was me. I think all the fun had run out of my drink and I just didn't know it yet. And so I always had that idea that I was going to be able to control it and enjoy it. And I know the AA Big Book talks about, when you control it, you can't enjoy it. And when you're enjoying something, alcoholically or drug addictly, it's not in control. And so I really, couldn't see it. It's kind of a forest from the trees type of a thing. And I was just too deep into my own disease to really see in any kind of clear perspective what was going on. And it wasn't until I had a chance to really just dry out that I was able to, see some of the stuff that had been going on. And, once the impaired thinking started to clear up a little bit and I could get some perspective and some time, I really did see how, different my drinking and drugging was, even from those other people I was drinking and using with. When the bartender cuts you off, when the drug dealer won't sell to you, when the ladies at the liquor store are concerned for you, when the people at the gas station don't want to sell to you because they've already seen you 2 or 3 times that day. Those are some of the warning signs for me that I just overlooked. Mixing different substances together was something that not everybody else was doing. I thought everybody was drinking and drugging and doing this and doing that. And it turns out that's just not the case. So for me, it was a lot of experimenting on my own and just trying to figure out, I always thought there was a way for me to do it and control it and enjoy it. And that just wasn't the case.
Yeah, for me, I earned some college degrees, including an advanced degree in school. I had a successful career. And it wasn't until I realized that every moment of my day was consumed with either drinking, thinking about how I was going to get my next drink or use. And it was planning out every activity I did around my addiction. And, it took years for that to develop. It didn't start overnight. I was drinking initially just to sleep. I had all these traumas that I was dealing with, and I couldn't sleep at night. And trying to medicate myself for that, eventually it became more of that. I tried to figure out how I was going to, get to that next drink, and so it just became a spiral that eventually ended me up in treatment.
Yeah, I know the DSM-5 has some pretty clear-cut diagnostic criteria. So if anybody's looking for that, it's the DSM-5. You can just look under addiction or alcoholism or opiate addiction, and it'll have pretty much the same set of diagnostic criteria. But I like to go through that with people and at least talk about it. So one of those that's pretty clear-cut is an increase in tolerance. People that are using frequently, people that are using daily, people that are using all the time have this increase in tolerance. So they need more of the substance to get that desired effect. When they don't have their substance, they go through withdrawals. And that can be anything from a hangover, which I didn't know was withdrawal early on, to sweats and shakes and vomits and muscle aches and bones hurting and all that kind of stuff. So you got the withdrawal when you don't have it. And people that aren't alcoholic or aren't drug addict don't know what that feels like. And it can feel like a really bad flu. It can feel like a really bad hangover. It can feel like your insides are falling out. Feels like your head's going to explode. So, people that aren't addicts and alcoholics, they don't drink enough to get the withdrawal experiences. The cravings are another pretty good indicator. And the cravings come in 2 flavors. For me, it's when I introduce the substance into my body instantly craves more. And that's that abnormal reaction that addicts and alcoholics have. I know after that first one goes down and I get that nice warm tingly feeling, all I can think about is getting that next one and the next one and the next one. The other part of that cravings that I talk to a lot of people about is the mental obsession. And that can be the clock watching. That can be trying to send out text messages before you get off work. That can be, stopping at the liquor store on your lunch break so that you have a bottle for when you get off work. That mental obsession comes in all forms. That mental obsession can drive a lot of people crazy. And if not treated, I think that mental obsession brings a lot of people back out to drinking and using. Another one that's pretty common is blackouts. And alcoholics and benzo users know all about blackouts. And it's drinking to the point where you just don't know what's going on. It's chemically induced amnesia, essentially. And but I look at other substances and opiates. They have people nodding out. They have people kind of half conscious, and that's blackout adjacent to where I come from. You look at a stimulant user and they're using to the point where they're up for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days in a row. And, they're really not real sure what's going on. They're taking shit apart. They're running around. They're causing all sorts of problems in their own lives and the lives of others, but they can't really tell you what they did over those last few days. So to me, that's blackout adjacent as well. A couple other things like loss of control, is a pretty common one. Non-addicts and non-alcoholics don't lose control over their drinking and using. They also don't lose control over their behaviors after they've been drinking and using. I got kicked out of a number of establishments, and some of those might have even been my fault. And that's that loss of control. Sane, sober, rational me knows it's not a good idea to get behind the wheel of a car. But drinking me, the favorite thing to do is to drive as fast as I can with the windows down and the music up. And I got a rap sheet because of that. I got a couple of DUIs, 4 of them to be exact, and probably a few other ones that should have been. And the other pretty dead giveaway for addict or alcoholic, drinking and using is continuing to use despite experiencing negative consequences. I know a lot of people that I drank and used with who maybe overdid it a couple times, and that was enough for them. People might have gone, left the center after having an extra glass of wine and gotten a DUI, and they stopped drinking and driving. Some people might have lost someone close to them and been able to internalize that and say, that's enough for me. But addicts and alcoholics, we keep pushing the envelope. We keep rolling the dice. We keep playing the odds. We think we're special, different, and unique, and these bad things are not going to happen to us. And I'm here to tell you they happen to us, and they happen far more often than I think we were able to realize. We were just really lucky, Paul and I, to get out of this. And a lot of our listeners know what we're talking about. We're the fortunate ones who had the opportunity to go to treatment, to go to 12-step meetings, AA or NA or Celebrate Recovery or any of that kind of stuff. We're the ones that had the opportunity to get this train back on the track. So, there's a lot of ways to diagnose yourself. But if you think you have a problem, you probably have a problem.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the mental obsessions, and I'll give you 2 examples from my life. I was snowed in at work in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
That's where I was born, Paul.
Were you born in Green Bay?
I sure was.
I did not know.
Go Packers.
And so, there's a foot of snow out there. None of the airplanes are going in and out. And so my first thought was I need to find a hotel close to a liquor store. So I found a hotel that was within walking distance of a liquor store. Liquor stores were still open, but everything else was closed. Airport was closed. I stayed there for 2 days until finally I found a flight to Chicago. Another place you've been.
You used to live there too, Paul?
Yeah, I used to live there.
Damn.
But yeah, my first thought was I got to find a place close to a liquor store. My other story was I flew into Minneapolis. Ever live in Minneapolis?
I've never been to Minneapolis, but I got family up there, I think.
Okay. I flew up to Minneapolis and my plane arrived later than expected. And so initially I had planned on driving a couple hours north into Wisconsin. And the plane arrived so late that, I wasn't going to make that drive. So I sat at the airport trying to figure out how am I going to find a liquor store open this time of night. It was that mental obsession. I could not figure out how I was going to make it through the night without having a liquor store close by. And I was very successful at the time. I flew a lot on private jets and making decent money. But yet my first thought was, how am I going to find a liquor store, in Minneapolis in the middle of the night? So.
Yeah, I lived out in Brookville, Indiana for a little while. So shout out to anybody that remembers, the chaos that I caused in Brookville, Indiana. And I lived on the corner of Main and 7th, and my bedroom door, led out to 7th Street, and right across the street was the liquor store. And there were many times where I was the first and the last customer that they had. I was on probation. I was trying to duck and dodge drug tests. I had a blow starter on my car, and I still couldn't stop drinking and using. I was just trying to figure out how to do this without getting caught. And I figured, I could just drink at home now. I don't even have to drive to the liquor. I can walk. I don't even have to put shoes on to go to the liquor store. And that really moved me closer to my bottom. Another perfect example is waking up and starting to go through those physical withdrawals, and the liquor store is not open yet. But the beer store is, the gas station's open. And so on more than one occasion, again, sorry, Mom, I would go to the gas station and get a couple of beers and go sit in the Kroger parking lot and wait for the liquor store to open. And that's how I stove off some of those cravings and withdrawals from getting real bad. And in my head, it's almost like I knew that something wasn't right, but it couldn't be the drinking. It couldn't be the drugs. It had to be something else. And I've talked to a lot of people who share that same sentiment, and they'll blame everything else in their life. The family, the job, the mental health, the physical health. It has to be anything other than the thing that's so evidently destroying our lives. And for me, it took a long time to finally get to a place where I could admit that. And then once I went to treatment, I actually learned about what powerlessness and unmanageability meant. And so it was powerless over the symptoms, and because of the symptoms of the disease, my life was unmanageable. So I look at this a lot differently today than I used to. But I do think that there's a lot of good information out there, a lot of good questions for people to investigate. But if you think your drinking, or if you think your drug problem is a problem, you might want to talk to somebody. And I know that there's a lot of good resources out there, a lot of good treatment facilities out there. And again, Paul and I are not your nurse. We're not your counselor. We're just here to try to shine some light on some things. But if you think you might have a problem, I would definitely encourage people to reach out and ask for some help.
Yeah, and I think with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. And
there was just a dog up here, and I was looking for the dog. So, all right, well, I'm going to go find the dog. You guys enjoy your day. Paul, say bye to these nice people.
We will talk to you later. And this is Old Dog saying bye.
Arf.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organization. This content is for informational purposes only and is not intended for professional advice. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Until next time.